2022 preview and prediction for the USC Trojans. And diving right into it, Nick, this has been a heck of an offseason that nobody predicted. It's a movie scene type of offseason for USC over the last couple of months. Lincoln Riley, the hiring comes out of left field. There was plenty of rumors all throughout the year, really, since Clay Helton was fired in week 2. And Lincoln Riley never appeared in one of those, but he ends up the head coach, massive contract. And then here just recently, the Trojans now start joining the Big Ten in 2024. Mike Bond is doing ridiculous work with the Trojans. What do you make of this insane offseason that has led to great success in the transfer portal? They also flipped that modern-day pipeline, it seemed, essentially overnight.
Clay Helton, was fired in week 2. Probably should have been fired a long time ago. Really overstayed his welcome in LA. And it seemed like Lincoln Riley was going to go to LSU. People were talking about, the private jet tracking, all that stuff. It seemed like Lincoln Riley at LSU was the hot rumor. That seemed to be a great fit. A lot of people were talking about it. Then all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, it seemed like a midnight hijack on the West Coast. Next thing you know, Lincoln Riley is the Trojans head coach. I didn't expect it. I think this is a fantastic hire. Came out of left field for me. 4 Big 12 titles at Oklahoma, turned them into a perennial powerhouse, competing at the national level every single year. Multiple playoff appearances under Lincoln Riley. Super talented team he built. Of course, those playoff appearances didn't go so great, but just getting there in general of Oklahoma is super impressive. He comes to the West Coast, and immediately the phones start lighting up. The portal blows up. The moves are fantastic. They get the links from Mater Dei again. Such an important high school in the area, one of the best high schools in the country for high school football. Incredible school to be able to have as a recruiting pipeline. They reconnect that, something they used to have in the Pete Carroll era. And then when you look at it, join the Big Ten. Maybe logically the move doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now, but the money in the Big Ten is certainly going to be there. The competition level in the Big Ten is going to be leaps and bounds better than the Pac-12. And if USC really does want to be national contenders every single season, like they plan to be with this contract, Lincoln Riley, and the work they have made over the past offseason, then they have to move to the Big Ten, have to play better competition week in, week out. And I certainly think they will get that playing in the Big Ten.
And not only did they add Lincoln Riley, but Mario Cristobal departs. It's a perfect offseason for USC. They bring in a guy who's going to flip recruiting. And they also, the guy that was dominating in state recruiting in California, he was invading these territories. He departs. He's now at Miami, so some of those recruiting ties really aren't going to make a whole lot of sense anymore. So almost a perfect offseason, USC recruiting. Obviously, they only ranked 70th in this incoming class with only 10 commits. They could not recruit during the year because there's so much uncertainty. There was, it took them a good bit to hire this head coach. So, and they didn't have a lot of time to work. So that's why he attacks the portal, picks up 20 guys. Only 10 guys signed, only 10 guys signed with them in this incoming recruiting class. But 2023, they've already landed a flora of impressive high-end recruits. So I think recruiting long-term at USC, it's going to be great. They'll be top 5, I think, every year. Because there's a lot of talent in this state. And Lincoln Riley, who doesn't want to play for him? This is a guy who's put a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL, a lot of quarterbacks on the Heisman podium. And looking at this offense, Caleb Williams, he's next. He arrives in LA after an unexpected breakout season for the Sooners, 2,300 yards and 27 touchdowns. He took over for a Heisman favorite who, once again, disappointed in the Red River rivalry. They put in the backup, and he shined. I still remember that game vividly, where he made so many impressive plays when they were down, and he led them back. He's very poised, showcased a strong arm throughout the year, a great runner, a high IQ football player. That Texas game is going to live on forever because he was so good, showcased so much. Wasn't phased one bit by coming in and having to play unexpectedly, led them back, and ended up having a great year. All those numbers came after October 9th. Not bad numbers for coming in, midway through the season. How do you think about Caleb Williams? And, a lot of people expect him to be a Heisman favorite as well.
If you had told me that Caleb Williams would be the starting quarterback at the end of the season for Oklahoma, I would have said that you were crazy considering the hype around Spencer Rattler and how solid a quarterback he looked and how much I expected out of him. It doesn't really work out for Rattler in Oklahoma. He also transfers. Caleb Williams took over the reins, 21 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, almost 2,000 yards. Solid season in relief. I really liked what he could do. He showed some significant talent as well. I think this guy has the serious potential here. He is the star. They got him out of the portal. A perfect fit, I think, him and Lincoln Riley. They wanted to stay together. They both head out west. I love the talent that they have, and I think that he's going to light it up on the West Coast.
Now, these NLI rules figured to be perfect for a team like USC, and then you mix a superstar like Caleb Williams with that. Will that be a big distraction for him? You're hoping it won't be, but if you're a player like him, you're going to get paid a lot of money, so you're certainly going to be asked to perform very well. So that's something to monitor, I think, with Caleb Williams. But looking at this backfield, supporting cast is tremendous. You got 3 transfers. Darwin Barlow from TCU last year. He's in a split time with Travis Dye. Comes over from Oregon. 1,200 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns. He had another 400-plus yards through the air and 2 more scorers. Austin Jones is also a pretty respectable dual threat back in his skills. 190-pounder. He'll be used in this offense similar ways as Dye. Lincoln Riley had made a comment when he was Oklahoma about, you know, how in-conference transfers were not good for the game. Well, here you got 2 of them in your own backfield. The rest of the roster has plenty of in-conference transfers as well. So how do you feel about this backfield? And then when you think about that comment from Riley, how do you feel?
Definitely think it was a bit interesting for Lincoln Riley. Of course, he says that Oklahoma probably wanted to avoid talent that he being plucked from him and being used against him. So then he comes in here, he steps in at USC and he starts picking up guys from across the conference. Definitely a bit of a snake move. I don't really know how I feel about that, but I think Dye is a solid back. I like the move from him. I think this is a good fit for him. He's going to step up here, be the back number 1. Had a good year last year, 16 touchdowns, 1,200 total yards. Solid back across the board. Excited to see what he can do. And I look at Barlow, didn't have the best season last year. Limited touches, only 62. I figured him to be the backup again this year, but I expect to see those touches step up a little bit, and hopefully can raise that average of 4.7 yards per carry.
They also added 5-star Alec Brown from Mater Dei, flipped from OU when Riley made the decision to come to USC. So this is a pretty loaded backfield, even more stacked receiver group, one of the nation's best, probably the nation's deepest. 4 transfers, 3 of them should start. You start with Jordan Addison, great deep speed, juicy route runner, nearly 1,600 yards, 17 touchdowns. The Blitnikoff Award winner. He transfers. This was a late addition here by Lincoln Riley and crew. Obviously, NLI factored big into that one. Brendan Rice, the son of Jerry, muscular, built frame, 6'3", 205, he's a special teams contributor. He's got some good speed. Mario Williams follows Riley from Oklahoma, a slot weapon. They love to use him underneath. A lot of people were shocked that Marvin Mims did not transfer, but they still ended up pulling at least one guy from Oklahoma in the receiving corps. That's Mario Williams. You look at Taj Washington. He was second on the team in receptions and yards, over 17 yards per catch at Memphis in 2020. So he's a deep threat guy. Gary Bryant, Michael Jackson, Kyle Ford, they were all solid contributors last year. They also picked up a high-end 4-star in C.J. Williams. Do you think this is the nation's deepest receiving corps?
There's certainly a lot of talent here. I don't know if I'd say deepest. I think Ohio State definitely beats them out in that regard. I really like what they have there in Columbus. But across the board, this is so talented, these guys. Jordan Addison was linked potentially with an Alabama move. Some people saying that he wanted to play with Bryce Young. That doesn't come to fruition. I'm sure NIL played a role. This is a perfect fit for me, though. Him and Kenny Pickett worked wonders together last year for Pitt. The stats don't lie. Nearly 1,600 receiving yards, 17 touchdowns. Also can run the ball a little bit, 8 yards per carry and limited touches. I think that he is such a star wide receiver. Of course, he wins the Blakely, so obviously they believe he's the nation's best wide receiver. I love the talent he has. He comes out west. Perfect setup for him. I think this is a great spot. I expect Caleb Williams to be slinging the ball to him constantly. And then I look at a guy like Rice. People don't really talk about him a whole lot. Limited experience at Colorado, but looked decent in that limited experience. 21 catches for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, 14.2 average per catch. I love the talent that he possesses. Of course, son of Jerry Rice, Hall of Fame wide receiver, one of the best of all time. This wide receiving core is so talented. I expect them to light up the scoreboard all season long in the Pac-12.
The offensive line was a big struggle under Clay Helton. That was his biggest knock, is that he could not get anything going on the offensive line. And, of course, they struggled mightily with discipline on both sides of the ball. As soon as he departs, the O-line shows up. They were quite impressive last year. They had 6'7" Bobby Haskins from UVA. He's going to join a few seniors here. Headlined by Andrew Voorhees, though, a 60-year senior. He can play 4 different spots on the O-line. Looking, for that first-round nod. He'd probably been a top 100 pick last year if he came out. PFF gave him 90 overall grade. Brett Nylon's going to be their center. Justin Dietrich at right guard, potentially. This offensive line, I think it's certainly a work in progress, at least in the long term, because this is a group that's really struggled for years. I mean, when's the last time USC had multiple players drafted on the offensive line? Elijah Vera Tucker is one of recent memory, but off the top of your head, you can't think of a lot of USC offensive linemen in the league. So I think long term, this is a positional group to watch. Short term, I think with all this experience, and then Voorhees at left guard, I think they'll be quite solid here this fall.
I like Voorhees a lot. Super talented guard. Expect him to go high in the draft next year. I like his spot at left guard. I think that whole left side with Cortland Ford as well. I think Ford's a solid guy, bit of a younger guy, has some decent experience, though. I like those two anchoring that left side. Solid center as well, and Nealon. I think he's super talented. This offensive line will certainly be a lot better than it was last year. Love the experience. Love the returning the guys. They have a lot of cohesion together. I love that in an offensive line. I think these guys will be solid.
Now, looking at the defense, it's quite clear the offense will be one of the nation's best, but can this unit also progress nicely? They only returned 3 starters, but they had 7 transfers in all different levels of the field. Tyrone Taleni from Kansas State, Earl Barquette Jr. from TCU. Those guys are going to anchor down some defensive line positions, mixed with a handful of veterans. Nick Figueroa, Tulai Tuipulotu. He's a defensive tackle that was really good last year for them. I look mainly at Corey Foreman, though, former number 1 ranked recruit. They're going to look to unleash him this year. This was a big-time add in their recent recruiting class there in 2021. It wasn't a great class, but they still pulled in the top-ranked recruit, kept him at home. I think that he's in for a big-time season. Brandon Philly, 345 pounds on the interior. This team only had 21 sacks last season from 8 different players. The pass rush was non-existent really throughout Clay Helton's tenure at Sam's. How do you feel about Foreman and the guys around him?
I think Foreman's super talented. I like what he can do. Limited experience, but he has what he can take. I love the potential there. Across the board, like you said, the pass rush really hasn't been there in the past couple of seasons. Just not enough talent, and these guys just can't quite put it together under Clay Helton. But I think now under Lincoln Riley, this defense should develop a little bit more. I think that the coaching hires on the defensive side of the ball have been solid. I think that they can definitely work from that.
It's a completely revamped linebacking core. For Alex Grinch, they added 3 transfers. Romello Height from Auburn, and then Shane Lee from Alabama. So they added 2 guys from big-time SEC schools. And they also got Eric Gentry from Arizona State. This is kind of a project player who really shattered expectations last year. 45 tackles, landed on the first team all-conference as a freshman. Combine those guys with Raylan Goforth, who was second on the team in tackles. They got a pretty good core here. Obviously they need to develop more awareness and playmaking. That's really something that's been absent from this linebacking core over the past couple of years. And, of course, the aforementioned discipline. I think those are 3 categories they're certainly going to improve in, and these 3 guys are going to be a big reason why.
I like Goforth's 60 total tackles last year, including a tackle for loss. Not a bad player. I think he has some nice potential there. I like the moves in the portal. Bringing in Lee, I think he's a solid player from Alabama. Love that SEC experience. Across the board, I like this linebacking group. I think they'll take a huge step forward this year. I definitely think the discipline will be a lot better under Clay Helton. They just really weren't playing as a team. They didn't seem to really care, and a lot of times they looked completely messy on the field. I think that will change under Lincoln Riley.
The pass defense has struggled the past couple of years, mainly with penalties. No pass rush has always got corners with their backs turned because they can't hold up for long enough. 25 pass breakups last year. Those 124th in college football. Oddly enough, Oklahoma was right behind them, 125th. So this is obviously something that's kind of concerning. Oklahoma, you compare their secondary talent to USC's, and I think USC has a brighter bunch. So they should be able to accomplish more. And they also just picked up, a 5-star in Damani Jackson, Zion Branch, a high-end 4-star. So they got those 2 incoming freshmen for the long term. Mekhi Blackman, he was pretty good in coverage. He comes over from Colorado. And Latrell McCutcheon from Oklahoma. So they got 4 new adds in the secondary to help out guys like Kalen Bullock, who really shined with his ball skills last year. He needs to get better as a tackler. He needs to get a little bigger as well. Xavier Alford, he was a redshirt freshman last year. He led the team with 3 interceptions. And Bullock, I believe he was 3rd on the team. So they had some young guys step up at safety last year. I think the future is bright at cornerback as well. Short term, though, how do you feel about guys like Blackman? And what kind of impact do you think they'll have this fall?
I like Blackman a lot. I think he was a solid player at Colorado. Good pickup in the portal. I actually think Zion Branch will get some starting time this season. I expect him to step up a little bit and be thrown into the fire. I love what he has coming out of high school. Super potential there. I love it. I would not be shocked to see him get some decent minutes this year.
Now, they obviously added 7 transfers on this defense, but none of them are really going to blow you away with their names or their previous production at other schools other than, I'd say, Blackman. So how do you feel about this defense? Improvement seems imminent, but at the same time, this has been a really tough group the last couple of years. They just need to learn to play football again, because when you watch them on film, take bad angles, they play with 0 discipline. The energy seems to be lacking as well. These guys just don't seem like they wanted to play football. It's 7 new faces, really more than that when you add some of the freshmen into the pile. How do you feel about this defense? Because this is clearly going to be the deciding factor if they want to make a playoff run this fall.
I certainly agree with you that some of the guys that picked up on the portal on defense aren't guys that jump off the page for you, although I think Blackman is a super talented player, and I think he's a solid piece. This defense will improve. They're going to have to, considering how poor they were last year across the board. I like them to step up, have a lot more discipline. I think that's important, that these guys get disciplined. They do not give up easy penalties, not give up dumb penalties this year if you want to make a playoff run. This team's going to have to work together this offseason, build that sort of cohesion that they need. I like the coaching. I think it's a solid hire on the defensive coordinator side of the ball. I expect them to step up, which isn't saying a whole lot considering how bad they were last year, but they got to keep it together because if this defense falls apart, they're going to miss the playoffs for sure.
Looking at the schedule preview and prediction, now I'm a USC fan, so I'll not be making one here to refrain from giving any bias. But Nick has them going 12-0 regardless, and you should ask yourself, how's a team that plays pretty much the exact same schedule from a year ago where they went 4-7, go 12-0, and make the playoffs? Well, that's the Lincoln Riley effect. You look at everything he's done in the portal, mainly on offense. These guys are going to score probably 40-plus points per game, and it might be even more than that considering the competition level they're in. I think Caleb Williams is going to have a big-time year. This receiving core is phenomenal. Loaded group at running back as well. The offensive line, I think, will continue to progress. And the defense, I don't think they can get much worse. These guys are highly energized. Corey Foreman, a former number 1 ranked recruit. Damani Jackson coming over might not play this much early on, but they got young, high-end recruits that want to be here and they want to play for Alex Grinch and these guys. 32 points per game last year on defense. I think that will certainly step up. You look at the schedule, though. They should make the playoffs. I don't want to be that guy that picks his favorite team to make the playoffs, but outside of Notre Dame and Utah, which I think they're favored in that game despite it being on the road, there's not much competition here for USC. So what do you think would be that obstacle that prevents them from making the playoffs if there was one?
I'm certainly not a USC fan. I certainly can predict them to go to the playoffs. I love this team top to bottom. I think the talent coming in from the portal is fantastic. If there is going to be one game that is certainly going to be a hiccup for me, it is Notre Dame to close out the season. The Fighting Irish have a talented roster, but I think it comes down to coaching in the day. If you're going to ask me would I'd rather have Marcus Freeman or Lincoln Riley, I'm taking Lincoln Riley 10 out of 10 times. No questions asked. I think that they win that game at home. I think that definitely plays a role. This is going to be one of the most important games for USC in recent memory. They haven't really played a super crucial game like this. Both teams could come in potentially undefeated. Notre Dame might come in with one loss. It's going to be a very important game for this program, maybe a program-defining game, a program-changing game. So I think that the fans are going to get up for it. But I also look at the game at Utah. I just think that Utah doesn't have enough talent right now to beat USC. I think USC on paper has a little more talent in the right areas, and I think I'm going to take the coaching in that situation. For me, 12-0 is very realistic for this USC team. Of course, that could be all preseason type, and they could fall apart. We have to see what happens as the season progresses. But looking at the schedule top to bottom, there isn't a whole lot of games on here where I get concerned about. At Stanford, not too difficult. At Oregon State, that one might be a little bit tricky, but they get the rest of their games at home. They're solid games at home. Traveling to Utah, of course, like we said, maybe trip up there, and Notre Dame, that's going to be a wild one. Could be a very important game in the entire college football landscape.
Yeah, that's literally it. Those are the only two teams that we match up with this offense. This team's kind of reminiscent of Ohio State last year, at least from an expectation standpoint. You know, the offense is going to blow everyone out of the water because their defense have a pulse. Last year, Ohio State, much tougher competition, still came just a few plays shy of making the playoffs. I think that's a pretty good comparison of a team that had a great offense, but defense was just not there. I think the same can be said about this team. The competition's a lot better for them, so 12-0, as a fan, of course, I agree with that. But again, just being a fan of college football as well, you look at the roster, you look at the schedule, 12-0 seems legit. I do think that, they would get blown out against the Alabama or a Georgia. Maybe not blown out, but they would certainly have a disadvantage when it comes to physicality because they're not playing any teams that give them that on a week-to-week basis. So I think this will be a very interesting year for USC long term. They're going to do phenomenal. Short term, this is great. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to make something happen with Caleb Williams. We'll have him next year, of course, but Jordan Addison, they're only going to have him for 1 year. How many years will they have this receiving core together? Not very much. Obviously, they're going to recruit well at this position, but when you have guys like Jordan Addison, Williams, Rice, more than that, really, they have plenty of guys that might not be here next year. So I think they need to make this opportunity count because even though Williams will be back next year, a lot of these other guys won't. So Nick's going with 12-0, USC to the playoffs. As always, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, in the era of NIL, I think USC find themselves in a perfect position. I think Lincoln Riley is going to lead the charge here, and this team could be back in the playoffs, first time in the playoff era, and the first time back competing for a national championship since the Pete Carroll era.
That's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.